A racist billionaire catches his maid doing something he never expected. And that single moment shattered his arrogance, changed his heart, and transformed his legacy forever. But how did a man so powerful, so proud, fall to his knees because of a single act of kindness? Let's begin. Arthur Wellington. The name echoed across Wall Street like a warning bell. The man was feared, admired, envied, hated. In his towering glass office overlooking Manhattan, Arthur sat at the top of his empire like a king on his throne. His custom-tailored suits, his private jets, his sprawling mansion, it all screamed success. But if you looked closer, beneath the shine of his empire, you'd find something darker. Arthur wasn't just cold. He was arrogant, proud, and worst of all, he was racist. Everyone knew it. His offhand remarks at board meetings, his sneers at the waitstaff during lavish dinners, the way he looked at people who didn't fit into his narrow world of wealth, whiteness, and power. Money had built him a castle. But inside that castle, his heart had turned to stone to at home. Things weren't much different. Arthur demanded obedience, precision, and control from everyone under his roof, his employees, his servants, even his own family. Especially his son, Henry Wellington, a teenager with tousled brown hair, soft brown eyes, and a heart so unlike his father's it was as if he belonged to another family altogether. Henry didn't care for Wall Street. He didn't care for power, or wealth, or the empty respect people gave his father. Henry cared about music. His dream was simple: to play the piano, to create beauty in a house where beauty had no place. But Arthur couldn't stand it. "Music is for the poor," he would sneer, sipping his scotch as Henry tried to practice. "You're destined for more. Wellington men don't waste their lives playing with toys." Those words cut Henry each time, deeper than a blade. But still he played. Late into the night, when the mansion halls were quiet, Henry's fingers stumbled over keys, searching for melodies his father would never understand. And then came Grace. Grace was just 19 when she stepped into the Wellington mansion as the new maid. She was young, but her eyes carried the weight of someone who had seen too much and endured too long. A quiet strength followed her into every room. She had been hired to clean, to dust, to serve silently in the shadows. But Arthur noticed her the moment she arrived. Noticed and dismissed. To him, Grace was invisible. Just another servant. Another name he wouldn't bother to remember. Worse, she was black. And in Arthur's poisoned view of the world, that alone placed her beneath him, he treated her with disdain. Orders barked, eyes averted, presence ignored. To Arthur, she wasn't a person. She was a tool. But Henry saw something else. In Grace's gentle way of moving, in the patience with which she folded sheets or polished silver, Henry saw kindness. A quiet dignity that not even Arthur's cruelty could erase. Grace saw Henry too. Not as the billionaire's son, but as a boy, lonely, struggling, yearning for someone to believe in him. One night, after yet another argument with his father, Henry sat at the piano, his hands trembling with frustration. His notes came out sharp, jagged, broken. He slammed his hands against the keys, a cry of anger echoing through the empty halls. That's when Grace, carrying a basket of laundry, stopped at the door. She hesitated, unsure if she should step inside. Then, softly, she spoke. "Would you like me to show you a trick?" Henry turned, startled. A maid? Teaching him. He wanted to laugh, or protest, or at least remind her of her place. But there was something in her voice, gentle, calm, unshaken by his frustration, that stopped him. Grace stepped closer, setting the basket aside. She sat beside him on the piano bench, her fingers hovering over the keys. And then, she played. Music filled the room. Not just notes, but emotion. A river of sound that spoke of sorrow and strength, pain and resilience. Each chord seemed to breathe life into the air. Henry's eyes widened, his anger forgotten. For the first time, he wasn't hearing piano. He was hearing soul. When the last note faded, Henry whispered, almost breathless, How do you know how to play like that?" Grace smiled faintly. "My grandmother taught me. Back home, we didn't have much. But we had music. And sometimes, that's enough." That moment lit a spark. From that night onward, Henry and Grace shared more than chores and commands. They shared music. Grace showed him how to feel the keys, not just press them. How to let his heart guide his hands. And under her patient guidance, Henry flourished. but their secret bond would soon collide with Arthur's world of pride and prejudice. And when it did, the storm would be like nothing this mansion had ever seen. Narrator's voice softens. Before we continue with this incredible journey, I spent countless hours researching and crafting this story to bring you something truly meaningful. If stories like this touch your heart, and you want to see more acts of kindness that restore faith in humanity, please subscribe and hit the notification bell. It means the world to me and helps these important stories reach others who need to hear them. Now, let's see what happens next. Have you ever witnessed an act of kindness that completely changed your perspective? Share your story in the comments below. The next evening, Henry returned to the piano, nervous yet eager. He sat there waiting, glancing at the doorway as though hoping Grace would appear, and she did. Carrying a feather duster this time, she paused at the sight of him sitting straight-backed, his hands hovering awkwardly above the keys. "You came back," Henry said, almost shy. Grace tilted her head. "So did you." That was the beginning. At first, their lessons were small. Grace showed him how to let his wrists relax, how to let his breathing guide the tempo. She hummed softly as he practiced, her voice low and steady, grounding him. Henry, and used to anyone in his life showing patience, found himself hanging on her every word. Arthur's world was one of criticism and correction, but Grace's world was one of encouragement. "Don't fight the piano," she would say. "Listen to it. Let it speak with you." And slowly, Henry began to hear it. It wasn't just the music that fascinated Henry. It was Grace herself. One night, after stumbling through a Bach piece, he asked, "Where did you learn all this?" Grace smiled faintly, her eyes drifting as if remembering a distant world. "My grandmother had a little upright piano in her church. We'd gather there after school. She'd make us sing hymns and teach us scales. We didn't have much, but when we played, it felt like the walls opened up and the sky came inside." Henry was silent, imagining it. His world had always been gilded walls and endless marble floors, but it had never felt alive. "Do you miss it?" he asked. Grace nodded. "Every day? But sometimes the music brings it back." Henry looked at her differently then, not as a maid, but as someone carrying a whole universe of memories inside her. One evening, Grace arrived to find a music book sitting on the piano bench. The cover was worn, but inside were neatly copied notes and exercises, written by Henry's own hand. "I thought, maybe you could have your own book here," Henry said, scratching the back of his neck. "So you don't always have to play from memory." Grace touched the pages gently, her throat tightening. No one had given her a gift in a long time, certainly not something that acknowledged her passion. "Thank you, Henry," she whispered. "This means more than you know." For Henry, it was a small gesture. But for Grace, it was proof that someone in this mansion actually saw her, not as help, not as invisible, but as a person. And that simple kindness planted the seed of trust between them. One late night, after a particularly beautiful lesson where Grace's playing brought Henry close to tears, he asked quietly, "Why do you do this? Why help me, when you know my father wouldn't approve?" Grace looked at him, her expression thoughtful. "Because music saved me. And I see it in your eyes. It could save you too. Everyone deserves to have something that makes them feel alive, Henry, even if the world tells them they don't." Henry swallowed hard. No one had ever spoken to him like that before, not even his mother, who had long since retreated into silence under Arthur's rule. And in that moment, Henry realized something important. Grace wasn't just teaching him piano. She was teaching him courage. But Arthur's shadow loomed large. Though he remained oblivious to the late-night lessons, his contempt for Grace was evident in every interaction. A clipped command, a cold glare, a muttered insult Henry pretended not to hear, but never forgot that Henry's chest would burn with anger. But Grace always kept her head high. She never retaliated, never lost her dignity. "Why don't you say something back?" Henry asked one day after Arthur had stormed out, leaving the air thick with tension. Grace gave him a small smile. "Because people like your father, they want to take your peace. I won't give him mine." Those words carved themselves into Henry's heart. He admired her strength more than anything else. Weeks passed. The music room became their secret sanctuary. Henry improved quickly under Grace's guidance, his clumsy fingers now flowing with emotion. The once broken notes transformed into melodies that echoed through the mansion halls late at night. Sometimes Grace would sing while he played. her voice warm and full, wrapping around the piano like a blanket. Henry would close his eyes, lost in the sound, feeling for the first time like he belonged to something bigger than himself. And in those moments, Grace wasn't a maid. Henry wasn't a billionaire's son. They were simply two souls connected by music. But secrets don't stay hidden forever. And the closer they grew, the greater the risk became. Arthur's empire was built on power and pride. And if he discovered that his own son was being shaped by the hands of a woman he despised, the fallout would be devastating. The night was coming when the music would no longer be a secret. What would you do if you discovered someone with incredible talent living in such difficult circumstances? Let me know your thoughts below. I read every comment. Weeks turned into months, and the quiet, secret lessons at the piano became the heartbeat of Henry's life. Every night, when the mansion's chandeliers dimmed and the servants retired, Henry and Grace slipped into the music room. The sound of hesitant notes had become strong, confident melodies. Henry no longer slammed the keys in frustration. Now his fingers danced, guided by emotion instead of anger. Grace watched him with pride, her own heart swelling as she saw the boy transform into a musician. "You're better than you think," she told him one evening. "Your father may never say it, but I see it. You're finding your voice." Henry's cheeks flushed with quiet joy. No one had ever believed in him like this before. It wasn't long before others in the household began to notice. The butler, Mr. Clark, raised an eyebrow when he heard strains of music drifting down the halls late at night. A maid whispered to another, "Do you hear him playing? The boy sounds different these days." Rumors began to stir among the staff. Some admired Grace's courage. Others warned her in hushed tones, "You're playing with fire. If Mr. Wellington finds out, it won't just be your job on the line. It'll be your future." Grace listened, her heart pounding with fear she tried to hide. But every time she considered stopping, she saw Henry's hopeful face and thought, "How could I abandon him now?" One evening, after a particularly moving piece, Henry paused and whispered, "Grace, can I tell you something I've never told anyone?" Grace turned, attentive. "Of course." Henry's eyes dropped to the keys. "Sometimes I feel like I'm invisible in my own house. My father only sees me as an heir to his empire. Not me, just his legacy. My mother doesn't fight him. She just disappears into the background. And me? I'm trapped between wanting to please him and wanting to run away." Grace's chest ached at the confession. She placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "You're not invisible, Henry. Not here. Not with me. I see you." Tears welled in Henry's eyes, but for the first time, they weren't tears of frustration. They were tears of release. But the walls of secrecy began to crumble. One night, Arthur returned home earlier than expected. The sharp click of his shoes echoed through the marble halls. Grace and Henry, deep in their lesson, didn't hear him approach until it was nearly too late. Arthur froze in the doorway, watching from the shadows as Grace leaned over Henry, guiding his fingers across the keys. A flicker of something crossed his face, confusion, then rage. But instead of storming in, he turned and walked away silently, his jaw clenched tight. The next morning at breakfast, Arthur's eyes were sharp as glass as he studied his son. "You've been practicing," he said slowly, suspicion dripping from every word. "Who's been teaching you?" Henry's fork clattered against his plate. His palms grew slick with sweat. "No one," he stammered. "I've just been working harder." Arthur narrowed his eyes, but said nothing more. Still, the seed of suspicion was planted. That night, Grace sat alone in her small servant's room, fear gnawing at her. She thought about packing her things, leaving before the storm hit. But then she remembered Henry's words, "You're the only one who sees me." She couldn't abandon him. Not now. Still, doubt weighed heavy on her. Was she doing the right thing? Was she helping Henry? Or was she leading him into disaster? The following week, Arthur announced at dinner that Henry would be attending a prestigious business seminar in London to prepare him for the future. Henry's heart dropped. "But what about my music?" he asked quietly. Arthur's hand slammed against the table. "Enough. Music is not your future. You will obey me." The silence that followed was suffocating. Henry's mother lowered her gaze. No one dared to speak. Later that night, Henry stormed into the music room, his face flushed with anger. "I can't do this anymore, Grace. He'll never let me live my own life." Grace's voice was steady. "Then you'll have to show him who you really are. Not by fighting his way, but by standing in your truth." Henry stared at her, the weight of her words settling deep into his heart. The following days were tense. Henry's playing grew more emotional, almost desperate. His fingers struck the keys with a mixture of anger and passion, the music echoing his inner turmoil. Grace worried for him. "Don't let anger guide you," she cautioned. "Music is stronger when it comes from love, not hate." But Henry shook his head. "Love has no place in this house." Grace leaned closer, her eyes unwavering. "Then bring it here, through the music. Show him the love he's never given you. That's how you'll reach him." Henry didn't answer, but in his heart, he knew she was right. The mansion had become a battlefield. Though no one had declared war, Arthur's suspicion grew with every passing day. Henry's determination deepened, and Grace, caught in the middle, knew the collision was inevitable. Soon, the music would no longer be a secret. And when that moment came, all three lives would be changed forever. Have you ever had to overcome obstacles to help someone you cared about? What challenges did you face? Share your experience below. It happened on a stormy night. Thunder rattled the windows of the Wellington mansion, rain streaking down the glass like tears. Henry sat at the piano, his hands trembling, not from the storm outside, but from the storm brewing inside the house. Grace sat beside him, her voice calm. "Breathe. Don't play for fear. Play for truth." Henry nodded, pressing the keys with deliberate care, each note echoing through the grand halls. But this time, Arthur heard. The billionaire burst into the music room, his face a mask of fury. "What is going on here?" he roared. His eyes locked onto Grace, then Henry. "How dare you teach my son behind my back?" His voice thundered louder than the storm outside. "You're fired," he snapped, pointing toward the door. "Pack your things and leave immediately." Grace froze, her chest tightening. But before she could rise, Henry jumped to his feet, his hands shaking. "No, Dad," he shouted, his voice breaking. "You don't understand." Arthur turned on him, his glare sharp as knives. "Understand what? That you've let this servant, fill your head with nonsense? You are a Wellington. You are destined for greatness, not music." Henry interrupted, his voice trembling yet fierce. "She's the only reason I can play. She believed in me when you never did." Arthur's eyes widened, stunned by his son's defiance. "All you see is her skin," Henry continued, tears streaming down his face. "But I see her heart. She's given me more than you ever have." The room fell silent. Arthur's face twisted, not in anger now, but in something he hadn't felt in years: shame. That night, Arthur couldn't sleep. He lay in his massive, empty bed, staring at the ceiling while Henry's words replayed in his mind. "All you see is her skin, but I see her heart." The words cut deeper than any insult from rivals or enemies. And then, the music returned to him. He remembered the melody Grace had played earlier, haunting and beautiful, filled with emotions he had long buried, for the first time in decades. Arthur Wellington felt small, vulnerable, human. The next morning, instead of marching into the staff quarters to enforce his command, Arthur did something no one expected. He walked quietly into the music room. Grace was there, sitting at the piano, her fingers gently brushing the keys. She froze when she saw him, her body tensing as if bracing for the blow. But Arthur didn't shout. He didn't fire her, he simply said, his voice low and rough, "Play." Grace hesitated, then slowly began to play the same piece she had taught Henry. The notes rose and fell like a heartbeat, filling the room with warmth that clashed against Arthur's cold exterior. And as the music washed over him, Arthur sat down, silent, humbled. For the first time, he listened, not as a master, not as a billionaire, but as a broken man longing for something real. The change didn't happen overnight. Pride was a chain that didn't break easily. Arthur stumbled. He snapped at Grace once or twice, caught himself, then forced himself to apologize, something he had never done to anyone before. He struggled to sit through Henry's practices, his instinct to dismiss and belittle rising every time he heard a mistake. But Grace's steady presence reminded him. Patience. And little by little, Arthur began to soften. That he asked Grace questions about her past. He listened, not out of curiosity, but out of respect. He even asked Henry to play for him, awkwardly clapping afterward. Though the sound was stiff, Henry noticed. And though it wasn't perfect, it was enough. Within months, Arthur did something no one could have predicted. He launched a scholarship program for underprivileged children, funding music education for kids who could never afford it. The man, once notorious for his arrogance and racism, now stood before reporters, declaring, "Talent belongs to no race, no class, no wealth. It belongs to those brave enough to pursue it." Grace watched the press conference from the back of the room, tears welling in her eyes. Henry stood beside her, his chest swelling with pride. Arthur caught sight of them, and, for the first time, his smile wasn't forced. It was real. One evening, months later, Henry played at a recital sponsored by Arthur's foundation. The hall was filled with families, children, and students, the air buzzing with anticipation. Henry sat at the grand piano, his hands poised above the keys. Then he looked into the audience. Arthur was there, front row, eyes glistening, his hands folded tightly in his lap. Henry played. And as the music flowed through the hall, Arthur's chest tightened, his heart breaking and healing at once. For the first time, he saw his son, not as an heir, not as a pawn, but as Henry, his boy. When the last note faded, the audience erupted in applause. Arthur rose to his feet, clapping louder than anyone else. His eyes locked on Henry's, filled with pride and something Henry had never seen before: love. Back at the mansion, the music room no longer held secrets. It was alive with sound, with laughter, with joy. Grace no longer came to the piano as a maid, but as part of the family. Arthur, once a man hardened by prejudice, now found himself listening, learning, even smiling when Grace played. One evening, Arthur surprised them both by sitting at the piano himself. His large, clumsy hands struck the wrong keys, making Henry burst out laughing. Grace covered her mouth to hide her giggles. Arthur shook his head, chuckling. "Don't laugh too hard. Even a billionaire can learn, right?" And in that moment, the walls he had built his whole life finally crumbled down. Grace's simple act of kindness, sharing her gift of music, had done the impossible. It had melted the heart of a man the world believed was unchangeable. This story shows how one act of kindness can change everything. What's one way you could make a difference in someone's life today? Challenge yourself and share your commitment in the comments. Time passed, and the Wellington mansion was never the same again. Where once there had been silence, now music flowed freely. Where once there had been walls of pride, now there were bridges of love. Arthur Wellington, once a man feared for his arrogance, was remembered for something greater: his humility and his foundation that gave countless children the chance to discover music. But the true change wasn't written in headlines or measured in wealth. It was written in the quiet moments, in the laughter of a boy at the piano, in the smile of a father who finally learned to listen, and in the gentle strength of a woman whose kindness turned a heart of stone into one of flesh. Grace never asked for recognition. She only wanted to share her gift. Yet her music became the key that unlocked an entire family's healing. Henry found not only his voice, but his father's love. Arthur found redemption in the very place he least expected it. And the world saw, through one act of kindness, that change is possible, even in the hardest of hearts. This story reminds us that no act of kindness is too small, and no person is too far gone to change. Let me ask you, if a simple act of kindness could change a billionaire's life, what could your kindness do for someone today? If this story touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Share it, because someone out there needs hope right now. And before you go, drop a comment below. What's one act of kindness you plan to do this week? Don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more inspiring stories, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a moment of hope. Because here on The Kindness Effect, we believe in one truth: kindness can change the world.